Let's take a look at the fantasy basketball waiver wire. Who is being added? Who should be added? How are we approaching these final weeks of the season? Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I think I've finally made it as a content creator. I got an invite to a party at the Bop House for content creators. Should be good. I'll check it out later. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Blue Sky, joshloyd.bsky.social, on Twitter at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode, it is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Also, LockedOnDaily.com, check that out. That is where you can find the best newsletter for your favorite NBA team. That is LockedOnDaily.com. Go ahead and subscribe. And subscribe to this show on YouTube and on the audio side. Do both, actually. And watch both and listen to both and thumb up and comment on both. We're here. It is, what day is it today? National Cold Cuts Day. Get your salamis out. Get your little prosciutto out. Get your capocolo out. What's your favorite cold cut? Turkey breast? What's the worst cold cut? It's got to be that, like, chicken breast. Has to be. The worst. Or Devon. What about Devon? What else is it? There's another name for that as well. I don't know. I've never eaten in my life. I will always refuse. Salami, prosciutto, pastrami, turkey, pretty good. Yeah, what else? Yeah. Capocolo is underrated. Bresciaola. I think that's probably the right list. Anyway, you're not here to talk loose meat strips. We're here to talk fantasy basketball. So let's have a look now at the most added players off the waiver wire. Last 48 hours on Basketball Monster. The number one player on that list is Zach Collins, now of the Chicago Bulls. And Collins is an interesting case because, again, this is where my job becomes confusing at times, and it can be confusing as a fantasy player as well. Is that we saw the Bulls with their centers healthy. Nikola Vucevic started. Jalen Smith played 18 minutes off the bench, and Zach Collins played 0 minutes. All right, cool. Smith got a concussion. Collins played the backup role. Vuce got a calf injury, so Collins had to start because nobody was there. Smith comes back, and Collins plays 41 minutes, and Smith plays 12. Okay. So based on like 2 big games from Collins when no one else was there, Billy Donovan's made a switch to the lineup, to the depth chart. Maybe. I don't know. Or was it Smith getting his bearings back after being concussed? Is this the new normal? I honestly have no idea. We will find out more in the Bulls' next game, which is today. And even then, I'm not sure that will settle it. The Collins is the starting center while Vooch is out. It might not be. I honestly don't know because, again, every piece of evidence suggested that it would be Smith over Collins. But now it's Collins over Smith. And I can see it going back and forth. So, at the moment, all you can do is roll with Zach Collins. And when Vooch comes back, you could move on and then see what they decide to do. I don't really think there's much more you can do. And the same goes with the next one. Because we know that Joel Embiid is out for the season. And we know that for the last 3 months or so, the starter when Joel Embiid has been out has been Gershon Yabusele. So then the last game, of course, Andre Drummond started over Gershon Yabusele. Like what? Because Yabusele missed 1 game due to a corneal abrasion, and Drummond kept starting. They're the next 2 most added players, Drummond and Yabusele here. Now, in this one's a little different because Drummond started, played 20 minutes, and Yabusele came off the bench and played 25 or 26. And I do think they will go back to Yabusele starting over Drummond, and he would be the guy that I prefer over Drummond. But it is worth noting, again, people, you will look at this, and it is an easy thing. This is where surface level analysis comes into it. And we like to go a little deeper. Because when we talk about Yabusele, we can look at his numbers and go, okay, they're fine, whatever. But now there's no Embiid, he's going to go off. But did you know that out of, this is when I looked before yesterday's game, I think he played 1,450 minutes or whatever for the season, Yabusele, and 1,050 of those had been in games that Joel Embiid did not play. So we'll roughly break that down to like, yeah, well, what's 5 out of 7 percentage-wise? I try to work it out in my head. 70 to 75% of the total minutes that Yabusele had already played this season were in games that Embiid did not play. So we already had a gigantic sample size of these games that Yabusele was the starter, not even starting next to Embiid, not even minutes with Embiid on the bench in games that Embiid didn't play. 70% of all of the numbers that Gershon put up were without Embiid in the lineup. So it's not like this is a new phenomenon to us. But again, who knows? He will have some strong streaks. He will have some mid streaks. He is absolutely fine to roster Gershon. But I think when we get down to it, and when we get into aggressive streaming cuts, he would be one of those guys that if they had a bad schedule week, I'd move on. I don't think the upside is high enough. We have literally seen it play out over 4 months, and it's been like, whatever. The next guy on there is, to me, a very clear ad, and that is Jonas Valanciunas. And this is, again, where luck is something you cannot factor in. Because Jonas Valanciunas had been held onto by people in fantasy leagues, even after he was traded to the Kings, and I was begging people, why are you wasting a roster spot here? And then, of course, the man who hasn't been injured in 3 years, Domantas Sabonis, pulled a hamstring yesterday. And that will probably cost him multiple weeks, making Valanciunas a must roster. And you could sit there if you've got Valanciunas, and I'm sure you would. I was so smart, I just held on to him because I knew it was a great stash for the playoffs. Is it? Like, I don't believe that holding for an injury for a guy who plays 14 minutes a night is a good move at all. In fact, I believe that costs you way more times than it plays out. But the time that it works, and again, this is where our brains always trick us, the times that it works, we remember. I remember Josh told me to drop him, but I didn't. I held, and then he started, and it was a league winner. You'll remember that one, and rightfully so, because Valanciunas has a chance to turn into a top 50 player, top 70 player down the stretch here. Depending how long Sabonis is out, this definitely could happen. But the process behind that, it's I still believe is 100% incorrect. Because you cannot predict when someone will get hurt, and you may have been holding on to the 250th ranked player through your fantasy playoffs, not even use that spot for streaming, and just got cooked in round one. But it worked out. So if Valanciunas was dropped, as he should have been, you go and add him now very clearly. Very much easy. Oh, that's not words. But you 100% add Valanciunas over Yabusele. You add him over Drummond, and you add him over Collins. You add him over Jalen Smith if you for some reason still have Jalen Smith. This is without question that you add him. The next one is an interesting player. It's Davion Mitchell. Now, Davion has had multiple opportunities in Sacramento. Didn't really do anything. In Toronto, he had chances to start early in the season when Manuel quickly was out and didn't really do much there. And he came down to Miami, and I was like, I don't really think much is going to happen here. Tyler Hero's their starting point guard, and Duncan Robinson's their shooting guard. He might be their backup. And then he came down to Spurs, went, nah, he's our starting point guard, and he's going to play 37 minutes a night. I went, okay, what? All right, I guess that's fine. And he's done it. And we know that Spoelstra's rotations can flip like that at any point, and they can go completely tits up. And the numbers you see on the screen here are the last week numbers for Mitchell. He's averaging 12 points and 2.3 threes. 1.3 rebounds is comically low, but 5.5 assists, 1.3 steals. But I'd be very, very cautious about this. I don't mind streaming Davion in. He's at 12% rostered, 30% advanced numbers. He's the 89th ranked player in categories, 24 points a game, fantasy points. But be very cautious with this. The reason that he's been able to do all of this, because he's a 13 usage player, he's shooting 62% from the field and he hasn't missed a single free throw. So if he wasn't shooting 62% from the field and he was shooting his usual horrendous number, you'd be looking at an assists and steals stream guy only. And you wouldn't be looking at a top 90 guy, which is what he currently is. You would not be looking at that. He is absolutely fine to stream when it makes sense on the schedule and you've got a nice little hot run of shooting going on. But I don't care how good you are as a shooter, you're not this good. And when you're one of the worst shooters in the NBA, you're definitely not this good. So I wanted to highlight him because his name keeps coming up. People keep mentioning to him, and the numbers and the minutes become hard to ignore. And you shouldn't ignore them. But what you do need to be cautious of is, again, how do you process it? Who do you consider a hold and who do you consider not a hold to move on or to add this guy? Like, for example, it's enough on Davion. The guy that's next on the list is Keon Ellis. And with Sabonis out, I think they will find way more opportunities for Ellis to play, and he just should be added. Full stop, clearly must roster now. Because instead of Sabonis playing 37 minutes, Valanciunas might play 29 or whatever. They go small, play Keegan Murray at the 5 at times, and Keon just gets 29 a night instead of 24 a night. 24 a night of Ellis is a steal streamer. 29 a night of Keon Ellis is a must roster player. And I think that will push him into that area and make it way more interesting. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Yep, it sure is. When the game tips off, the NBA action, it's just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You can place live bets all throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or things start to go haywire early in the game and you want to go the other direction, imagine you were live betting the Celtics-Cavs game the other day. What was the score? 25-3, Boston's way, and you went, all right, maybe I'll have a crack and see if Cleveland can come back here. Well, the odds on that would have been pretty good, and you could have got a big payout. And you can get even bigger payouts and bigger odds if you combine your live bets into a same-game parlay as well. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. Okay. Let's take a look at some other waiver wire ads. We're going to look at who's been added in the last 24 hours over on Yahoo. The number one most added player, again, I don't want to double up, so the number one most added player, not included the guys I just talked about, is Duncan Robinson. Because, again, Spoelstra is leaning back into Dunk. He's not starting games at the moment, and they're banged up with Andrew Wiggins dealing with issues and Jaime Jaquez Jr. also injured. Jaquez was playing 0 minutes and then moved into being a starter. Robinson has been a very good source of points and threes, but that's it. Like, don't look at him as anything more. You stream him in for a single game stream, not a problem today, but otherwise, not a long-term thing. Chris Dunn could be a long-term thing. I think that Norman Powell being out has helped, but it hasn't been the only reason. It's given him maybe 2 minutes or so, but Dunn was starting before Powell got injured. And it will just help with 2-3 extra minutes. So he probably loses 2 to 3 extra minutes, maybe an extra touch a game, but it's not like Dunn is any sort of high usage player, so that doesn't really impact in a massive amount. And at this point, I do think that Chris Dunn is just a guy that we want to hold on rosters. And then we adjust it later on, and that's fine. When we say must roster, and I want everyone to have this idea in their head as well, because I'll get these questions often. They'll be like, hey, what do you think for the playoffs? Who's the best hold rest of season through the playoffs? I'm going, nobody. Because you're talking about your worst player and maybe a guy off the waiver wire, and that's fine, make a switch now, but in 3 weeks' time, who cares? Like, it's going to be completely different, and most likely you're just going to be cycling through to find someone that hits, and if that guy that you added hits and becomes one of your best 7-8 guys, then that's great, and if it doesn't, you move on to the next one. Having 5-week-out views on things at this point of the season doesn't serve you well at all. We have got to be more narrow, short-term focused when we're thinking about stuff. So yeah, maybe Powell does impact Chris Dunn and Dunn's value drops and the steals have a lull in 3 weeks' time. Whatever. You move on when that happens. Quentin Grimes, the next most added player, he had 2 absolute stinkers in a row. One of them he left early with knee soreness. The next one he played only 20 minutes as a starter. And then went absolutely bananas last game. And this is one of those things that can trick our brains. I'm not saying that Quentin Grimes shouldn't be rostered. He's totally fine to roster. And if he's going to get the Knicks nurse minutes diet, we love that. And if there's chances that Paul George and Maxey don't play in games, it's also great. But one thing happened. We got a notification on Friday. Hey, Joel Embiid out for the season. You go, okay. All right, we got that. The very next game, Quentin Grimes scores 44 points. Could have had a DoorDash 50 on us if he had to hit some free throws. He went 2 of 8 from the line. Could have dropped a 50-point game. And yeah, he would have got a second DoorDash code. He was ridiculous. But did Joel Embiid being ruled out? He was already out. Did that make Grimes hit 80% of his shots? No. If you look at it and go, well, of course, Embiid out, Grimes' numbers are going to step up. Look at that. It all happened. But that's not what happened. Right? That's not what happened because Embiid had been out all the way through. And Grimes had been starting. The last 2 games were bad, whether it's injury-related or whatever it was. He wasn't that good in that. But also then, if you take those 2 games away even, the game that he put up, which ties in incredibly well, like perfectly, with an announcement of Embiid, not an injury, the announcement of Embiid, and it ties in, but that didn't make him, what did he shoot, like 16 of 20 or something? That didn't make that happen. It didn't make Tyrese Maxey and Paul George shoot 10% or whatever they shot. It didn't make Grimes become the focal offensive point for one game. That's not how that works, but it is easy to get tricked into it. I'm not saying Grimes absolutely just roster him, right? We roster him and we figure it out later, but that is not what happened. I always find it to be important to make sure that's clear. BDNR has been added. Big Dick Nick Richards. And yeah, Nick Richards, I'm not sure if you're aware, I've been fairly critical of his ability as an NBA player. I've been fairly critical of the way that people treated him as a league-winning, must-roster, gotta-grab sort of player. I didn't believe in that at all. But I will be as honest. I always try to be honest and objective with what I do. I do. He's been solid the last 3 games. Yes, there are some bad team merchant performances in there, but the production is up. And if the production is up and it makes sense on the schedule, you use him. That's totally cool. But you just don't view him as anything more than a stream in that group of 10 centers who can be used in that spot. Like, if I had the choice and I could add Nick Richards, I could add Jonas Valanciunas, I'd add Valanciunas, without question. If I had the choice between Nick Richards and Zach Collins, I'd probably actually take Nick Richards. And the reason for that is I think that I could see Richards' role at least expanding or staying close enough to this for the next week, whereas Collins could go away in a game or two. But that's more debatable for me. But yeah, no problem with trying Richards out again. He was an easy drop before. The players improved. We'll see if it's just bad team stuff. We'll see if it's a different mix of players, whatever. Fine. Kyle Filipowski. A brilliant ad for Sunday. We talked about this on the Waiver Wire streaming show yesterday. I said, I believe the Jazz are going to sit all of their guys because it's against the Pelicans, so that makes Filipowski a great ad. And the Jazz sat all of their guys. Now, I also believe that given the way this schedule plays out this week, they have got matchups against terrible teams. So I think you're going to get quite a few Filipowski starts. But I don't know that for sure. My first instinct for Sunday was 100% correct. That doesn't mean it's going to be correct all through the week. But it could be. But it doesn't mean it will be. But adding Filipowski, that is a very clear indication from Utah of what happened on Sunday, that it is going to happen more times. So Filipowski in 20 minutes is not good enough. In 33 minutes, he's very much good enough. And I think you're going to get a close enough split between those two things to make him worthwhile. The next one on this list is Jeremy Sohan. And Jeremy Sohan's an interesting case because we thought when Victor Wembanyama went down that Sohan would be able to step up and maybe be able to put up some good numbers. And then guess what? He did not. They didn't start him at center. They started Bismack Biyombo. And Sohan's minutes would stay low 20s and they'd keep starting Harris and Barnes. But there are things happening here with the Spurs that I think are worth noting. Barnes has played 18 minutes the last 2 games. Jeremy Sohan started the second half at center for the Spurs over Biyombo. Over the last week, he's 127th in points leagues, 130th in category leagues. He's averaging 12 and 8, only 0.7 blocks, but it is coming on 64% shooting, which is going to come down. But this is only 20 minutes of action. And if what I think might happen is and we have seen this time and time again with the Spurs over the last week, is their starters don't do a huge amount. And it's Castle and it's Sohan and even Champagnie coming off the bench, while Barnes and Chris Paul are seeing everything pulled back. So if you want to have a look at Sohan and say, is this the beginning of a new trend? I think it's worthwhile. I don't know that it will be the beginning of a new trend, but 2 games that are, and we'll see what happens in the Spurs game Sunday, but 2 games that are of like 18 minutes played for Barnes and Chris Paul playing 21 a night and Sohan starting the second half over Biyombo. We'll see what fast bowling legend Mitch Johnson decides to do as we move forward with this team, but they are all positive indicators towards Sohan. And that's useful for us to pay attention to. And sometimes you want to get just a little bit ahead of it and see where it goes. Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. Quentin Grimes swooshed. You almost saved. He didn't quite hit the 50, but he was close. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time an NBA player scores 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. When any player scores 50 in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight. Whatever it is that you're looking for. Maybe you want a little bit of sushi, a bit of sush. Maybe you want to grab some Mexican, some pizza, a little pasta, a rice dish, some snacks, some candy. Whatever it is on DoorDash, you can do it, and you can do it at a discount. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders of participating merchants. You must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. All right, so there are 6 names that are quite interesting across the fantasy basketball waiver wire landscape. Let's look at the most dropped players now on Basketball Monster. And number 1 on this list is Joel Embiid. Yeah, he is out for the season. I was like 99% certain that is what would happen. It is now confirmed to be happening. At the start of the season, my take on it, and I think I said something the other day. No, I know that I tweeted this out and it was incorrect. But I might have said on the show as well. I said that in the preseason, I was like, I am not drafting Joel Embiid at all. And that's not what I said. What I actually did say is that I would not touch Joel Embiid in the first round whatsoever. If it gets to pick 15 or 16, I would consider it. Right? That is what I said in the preseason. So I'd conflated my ideas on that. What I did say is once the season was underway, I said I am not trading for him under any circumstance, is what I said during the season. And I will have that thought process. Now, I won't draft Joel Embiid inside the top 50 moving forward. I won't do it. Because I firmly believe, and I believed at the time that his knee was rooted, and I thought that taking a chance in the second round might have made sense. It obviously didn't, but I would say that Embiid did not last to the second round in any draft, honestly. So I think, I clearly avoided him. And that's my take on that. But yeah, he's done. We talked about Yabusele. We talked about Drummond. The next one, a little bit out of the blue, Ayo Dosunmu, out for the season. Shoulder injury. Obviously, we're dropping him, so he's been dropped. We'll talk a bit more about the replacements for him, but no Zach LaVine. No Dosunmu. Lonzo Ball, big boost up. He played 35 minutes in an overtime game the other day, so we are full steam ahead now. He's going to start rest of season. You've got Josh Giddey, you've got Kobe White. Right, they're all going to get bumps here. The other one to watch, and we're going to feature him later, is Pants Kevin Huerter. So we'll keep an eye on that. But Dosunmu dropped. Jordan Clarkson dropped. Yep, can't rely upon him. See you later. Max Christie, one of the most dropped players. Understandable. Also, again, the trade happens. He moves into the Mavericks. They've got no players there. He has some hot games, but it's on the back of 60% shooting. And it looks great, and then the shooting's cooled off, and it looks bad. Now, the reality, of course, with all this is always somewhere in the middle, but he's totally okay to move on from when we're talking this time of year, 6 weeks to go in the NBA season. When we're looking at these guys who are your 11th best guy, 12th best guy, who cares? You move on, you drop them, you add the next guy in, you drop them, you add the next guy in, you drop them. You're not beholden to these sort of players. Matas Bazalis, also an incredibly easy drop. There might be a period where he plays 35 minutes and the Bulls have other guys injured, whatever. Don't worry about it. It's not happening now, so move on. And the other one there is Jose Alvarado, who, despite rests of CJ McCollum, Zion, Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown over the last 2 games, bro didn't even get to 25 minutes. And he might have games where he does that, but if they're not going to prioritize you in those games, and the fact that Bruce Brown came back and started over CJ McCollum and they didn't prioritize Jose Alvarado, then you don't prioritize Jose Alvarado. They might change their mind on that, and coaches do this all the time. But again, if you find yourself stuck, absolutely rooted into a spot where you're just like, I will hold and I will wait, and maybe they change their minds, you're going to just let a lot of opportunities, a lot of accumulation chances just pass you by. And in the end, it might work, but at what cost in the interim? And so that's why that player, Jose Alvarado, is not good enough to sacrifice roster flexibility. On Yahoo, the most dropped players. 2 Nets guys at the top. Number 1, Killian Hayes. Cool, no problem. When D'Angelo Russell comes back, if D'Angelo Russell comes back, Hayes isn't going to do much anyway. His 10 days about to expire, so we'll talk about that in a little bit, but he's more of not in a little bit, we'll talk about it right now. Like, he's a fine assist and steal streamer. He's not a guy you hold on to. Zaire Williams has had 2 absolute stinkers in a row, and with Cam Thomas returning and the Nets still competing, not necessarily winning every game, but competing, Williams is going to be up and down, back and forward, a stream type guy. They've got a 3-game week this week as well. Brandon Pajemski's been dropped. Last game for him was not very good. Steve Kerr, foreseeable future legend, went to different directions. A lot of minutes of Moses Moody in that last game. I still think that Pajemski's probably the guy that we want to hold. I don't think I would have made a reactionary drop on Pajemski after that last game, but I can understand why someone would have done it. I would have held. The next one is Moses Brown, who, again, I'm glad that people dropped him. He had that solid enough game last time against the Bucks, but again, I was very, very adamant on this, very clear on this, that was it. He cannot play for the Mavericks again. He can't. He also can't sign a 2-way contract anyway. He can't sign any 2-ways. He's not allowed to. He's past that level of experience in his NBA career. So while he was fine to stream while he started, the one thing you needed to be cautious of is don't drop anybody who you would have regrets or you have the rest of season value, because there was no chance, zero chance that Moses Brown could be a starter for the Mavericks. Zero. It was never going to happen. It was actually illegal for it to happen. The Mavericks will get arrested if they did that. Crimes against basketball. But also just the salary cap and the CBA. He couldn't do it. And I hope that you listened, not to add him for the one game, but I hope that you listened about where that impact was rest of season. Daron Sharp has been dropped. Interesting. He played like 18 minutes last game. Claxton played 24, but Sharp was still very good in that game. He's a tough one because there's no indication that he's going to start over Claxton. In fact, there's almost no chance that he starts over Claxton. It's not going to happen unless Claxton's out. But even in 19 minutes, he's doing enough. Now, they've got a 3-game week this week, which makes it harder. It's 3 games of Moses Brown where you probably get under 60 minutes total for the week, when you could stream that spot, get 7 games in and get 140 minutes of somebody. Is that worth it? I don't know. They've got 5 games the week after where he'll almost for sure be worth it. And that's where you've got to make the decision. Do I need this roster spot now? How do I view it? So I don't think I would have dropped Sharp there, but I understand the reasonings. And then Moses Moody dropped. Played a lot of minutes last game, but he's absolutely only a stream level player and not a must roster guy. I think that's fairly clear. Let's look at some hot players, guys, who have been in the top 100 over the last week of NBA action. Number 1 there is Richaun Holmes. We know why. Alex Sarr missed most of those games. Holmes was actually really good in the game that Sarr returned, but I don't think we want to hold on to a Wizards 32-year-old backup center in the maybe hope that he has some okay games backing up Sarr as we move forward. Don't think we worry about it. It's been a good run, Richaun. Thank you for your service. The next one there is Terrence Shannon Jr., TJ Shannon. Some very good games from Shannon. But with players returning, DiVincenzo back, Edwards playing, Randall and Gobert coming back soon, I do not think that there is a way that Shannon has a value that's going to, like he was 51st over this last week, which is honestly unbelievable. He did it through scoring like about 20 points a game and not much else. He's not going to do much in many other categories. So while you look at that ranking, and this is where you've got to be able to interpret context and rankings, that sort of stuff. So you go, well, why wouldn't I roster the 51st ranked player? Well, the reason is it just probably doesn't make any sense long term. And I think the next one is I know the next one is Haywood Highsmith, but I think the same sort of stuff applies. Highsmith's had a really good run of things. We know that he was a DMP for a week and a half. And then with some injuries and Wiggins being out, he stepped up. And Jovic being out, he stepped up. And he's a guy that generates steals and blocks, and that's what he does. But do I trust that Haywood Highsmith is going to, even play? He probably will now that Jovic is out. But Spoelstra might not play, because Spoelstra played, Kyle Anderson 28 minutes in one game, then 5 in the next one? All right. So is Highsmith the guy? Is Anderson the guy? I don't know. I would consider a stream of Highsmith when I'm looking for defensive numbers, but absolutely not looking at him as like, here we are, here's the solution, here's the ad, let's go. Don't view him that way. That's not how I view him. Keyshawn George, 67th. A little surprised to see that he was that highly rated over the last week. He's had some good games. It's largely coming on the back of defensive stats. And there's one of those things, when you're looking at short-term results in fantasy and category rankings, one of the things you know about that will always elevate someone up, it's going to be three-point shooting and high percentages. The other thing is, what if they had just an outlier random defensive stat game? And that's where George has really come in. The thing I feel better about with George is that his value and his minutes have been relatively secure. Now, the Wizards are in an interesting spot next week where they play Monday, and then they have 2 games for the remaining 6 days of the week. So if you are looking to maximize games and you've got a fringe wizard like Keyshawn George on your roster, that if you let him play on Monday and then drop, you can actually get some real value in a 2-slot stream situation. So again, are you in playoffs? Does it make sense to do that? Because that would be expendable to me in that situation. And then I did tease it earlier, so we're going to talk about it now. But it's time for us to talk about Fanapants Kevin Huerter, because over the last week of action, Huerter has put up some good numbers. Kevin Huerter is still a reserve player for the Bulls, and he still remains, contrary to maybe popular belief, Kevin Huerter. He is 7% rostered. He is the 84th ranked player in -1 rankings. He's averaging 26 fantasy points, 17 points a game, 3 assists, 1 steal. So the thing we look at here very clearly, and again, if you can get caught up in rankings and go, well, Dosunmu's out, so Huerter's going to play this big role, and he will play a large role, absolutely he will. And I've got no issue if you want to consider him as an option. But I would be considering Kevin Huerter in the Duncan Robinson grouping. In the probably a little higher now than the Gary Trent grouping. But he is a bench 3-point guy. Because there's one thing I'll look at on this list. If you look at those stats, 17 points, that's great. Also, that's below average. 4.7 threes. All right. 4.7 threes. That seems entirely unrealistic. What if he hits 2.7 threes per game? Which, in 27 minutes a night, would be a very realistic and good result. Well, what would that mean? It means he'd be an 11-point scorer. 11, 1, and 3 with 2.7 threes is absolutely nowhere near a must-roster player. None. Not even close to it. It's not remotely sniffing it. So while the numbers are solid at the moment, on the back of that is Steph Curry level 4.7 threes. And this is a man who is incredibly hot and cold, and 4.7 is not a reliable number. I'm not going to tell you not to add him, because again, the opportunity has opened to Sumu out for the season. So he will play, instead of 22 minutes, he'll play 27, 28. There'll be games where Lonzo Ball sits, where he'll play 32. But even if Kevin Huerter was to play 32 minutes a night, no one should bank on him getting 4.7 threes a game. And those numbers down the bottom are in 30 minutes. That's not bench roll minutes. That is in like starter level minutes. So I don't think that he should be labeled a must roster guy at all. It's on the back of almost 5 threes a game. If you bring it to a normal level of round 3, you're talking a 12-point player. And even with those numbers, if for points leagues, he's like 26 fantasy points is not good enough. So yeah, I know that a lot of people are going to rush to add him. And I get it from a streaming perspective. For points and threes, it's there. But as a guy that we go, yeah, we're set. Here we go. League winner, whatever you want to say. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. The next guy on that list is Jakaris LeVert, 91st ranked player. He's had a pretty good week. Now, he is also incredibly hot and cold. When the Cavs have a good run of things, the Hawks have a good schedule spot, you look at LeVert as an interesting option. He's playing 29, 30 minutes a night. It hasn't always been a minutes issue for him, though. Often it's just like, hey, now I've shot 1 of 6 from the line and 2 of 10 from the field. And I've completely killed you, and we've gone with Terrence Mann instead. But there aren't as many guys in Atlanta now, and I don't think Vic Krejci's returning, honestly. So I don't think that's going to impact him. LeVert is totally okay to have on a roster. But he's also one of those guys that I believe, and we're going to do a recap of this probably at the end of today's show. Sunday recap show of my streaming plan test. And LeVert was one of those guys that I considered an expendable player. And we'll see how it panned out versus just using that spot for streaming. So that's how we're viewing him. But a good run. 6 other names I want to talk about before we get out of here. I've got to just mention Bol Bol again. I don't know what happens. I don't know whether the Suns keep starting Bol Bol, but honestly, for you, this one is one, it doesn't matter. Because you are talking about a top 50 upside player if he starts and plays 25 plus minutes. And that's not what you find from adding Kevin Huerter. That's not what you find from trying Zach Collins. You don't get that. Bol you can. So just, if Bol Bol is on your wire, that is the ad clearly. The next one is Steph Castle, who, my thoughts on him are really clear. He is incredibly athletic. He's probably going to win Rookie of the Year, I'd say almost without question. I think he's incredibly still overrated. And for fantasy, he has been nowhere near as good as his roster percentages made out all through the season. But what has changed at the moment? He had the period where they just weren't playing him. I was like, that's very weird. But there seems to be a change. And Mitch Johnson came out and said, yeah, probably should have played him more. We're going to pump a lot into him. And they did. He needs close to 30 minutes and close to 30 usage because the other stuff is so unreliable to be a fantasy relevant player. But I think they might do that. I think they're going to continue to do that at that level. It's not a common sense move for a team that wants to win, but I don't think they're trying to win at the moment. I think they're trying to just overload him with plays and usage and minutes and see what comes of it. And you are going to have some really horrendous games. But you're going to have some big ones as well. And if you're rolling 34 usage, it's really, really tough, Cam Thomas, to sit that out. Shaedon Sharpe I'll put on this list because he was rightfully dropped because he was terrible. He'd been benched. He'd played 24 minutes a night. He was an inefficient, below-average scorer, and he did nothing else. And then Jeremy Grant and Denny Avdia went down, and he started, and he put together 2 big games in a row. And the thing again is that it's easy to look at that and go, well, Avdia and Grant were out. Of course, Sharpe went off. Yeah, in those 2 games, he shot 70% from the field. Just having Avdia and Grant being 70 is I'm making that number up. It's not exactly accurate, but it's pretty close, right? Having Avdia and Grant out does not turn him into the most lethal shooter of all time. It was coincidence that tricks our brain to go, he went big because they were out. Not really. He got big minutes and he got more opportunity, and then every shot went in, so everything turned to look awesome. So I've got no problem. Again, if you want to believe that Shaedon Sharpe will start rest of season, I don't think that he will. But if Jeremy Grant's knee keeps him out rest of season, which again, who knows with this guy, maybe they do start Sharpe, but that level of shooting is not going to hold. I'll put Quentin Post on that list. People have been adding him. He had 2 good games in a row. Last game was without Jimmy Butler, so they started him there. And so that means Butler and Kuminga have to return very soon. Butler probably next game. Kuminga maybe a game or two later, I don't know. And Post has started many games this season. He's been bad in nearly every one of them. But he's an interesting threes streamer in deeper leagues while players are out. And then we're going to end it off with a little bit of the bubbly. Julian Champagnie, like Keldon Johnson, Steph Castle, Jeremy Sohan, he's pushing up. The minutes are pushing up as they lean more into these guys in San Antonio. If Champagnie gets to 28 minutes a night, Julian, then we're in as a 12-team league guy. He's not quite there. If I'm in deeper leagues, I'm much more interested in Julian Champagnie at the moment. And that's intriguing. Because he's a very good player, I think, and he's quite a good fantasy contributor. We just need the right playing time to be there. And I think if you want to go, hey, I want to get a little ahead of this, but that's hard to do in playoff time. I wouldn't mind just leaning into that a little bit. I firmly believe he is a better player than Keldon Johnson and a significantly better fantasy player than Keldon Johnson. So we'll see how they direct that. But then the next one that's interesting is his brother, Justin Champagnie. Now, Champagnie, Justin, Washington, has flashed things all season. But part of the problem with Justin Champagnie was that he was on a 2-way contract. And they were preserving his games played. So he just wasn't playing enough. But guess what happened today? He got signed to a full contract. I think it's a 4-year deal. I'm sure there's some non-guarantees in there. But that should make you go, what's going on here? It's still going to be iffy with Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton there. By the way, the comment from Brian Keefe about, we hope Malcolm Brogdon, we expect that maybe he comes back before the end of the season. You know what that means? He's not coming back before the end of the season. That's what that means. And I don't think that Middleton and Smart will last all the way. I don't know. And last game was without Jordan Poole, and that did help Justin Champagnie. But the contract conversion should mean to me that we could get at least 20 minutes or so here of Justin Champagnie. And you look at these numbers to go, okay, 16 usage, he's 2% rostered, no one cares, Josh. He's averaging 5 points. Just move past 5 points a bit. 7 rebounds, 1.3 steals, 1.3 blocks, 50% shooting, 16 minutes. If I add 8 minutes out of that, 24 minutes a night, I'm not going to say that the steals and blocks are going to be 2 a game because they won't be. But why couldn't he be 9 and 7, 2 assists, 1 steal, 1 block? And that's not for everybody. But in 16 minutes, he's averaging 22 fantasy points. In 16 minutes, he's a 125th ranked player. And they converted him to a full contract now. They can play him every game. That is an interesting signal. And teams are going crazy with cutting and signing guys today, by the way. So just keep an eye on those things. But that's an interesting signal. So we keep an eye on both Champagnies. And in deeper leagues, we probably pop the cork, I reckon, in some of those leagues. And that is a waiver wire show. Yes, you're right. I didn't do a must roster list because I don't think that is a useful tool at this point. Because I want you to be looking at your own individual spots. I can throw out a name, you add it doesn't make sense for your team, and then it costs you versus helping you. I didn't even throw out a list of droppable names because, again, there are so many of your guys become droppable now. Who's your worst player? They're droppable. Who's your second worst player? They're droppable. Unless they're top 70 guys, your second worst and worst player are droppable. That's how you should be viewing this. What I want you to view it as well is an opportunity now to, on National Cold Cuts Day, hit the thumb up, drop me your favorite cold cut down in the comments, and subscribe. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Make it a good day. Keep yourselves positive. Let's win these matchups. See ya.